Hello, and welcome to another episode of CRT Sound System. So we've got episode 51 for you this week, and we're finally getting around to the behemoth that is Touhou. Um, and I'm here with Reese, as always. Reese, how are you?
Incredible. How are you, Tom?
I'm pretty good, yeah.
Excellent.
Excited to do this one, and also a little bit scared, to be honest.
Yeah, I,
Um,
I I'm just letting it wash over me, just
Yeah, like it's
like a
definitely been one
nuclear
of those
shockwave.
ones that like people have talked to me about, like, oh, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this. I'm like, it's a lot of music, it's a lot of games. I really need somebody to guide me through it. So thankfully, we do have somebody for that. So returning guest, Justus. Justus, how are you?
Justice,
Oh, I'm
hey.
fantastic. I am so stoked to be here right now. I've been looking forward to doing this episode all year long, guys.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah. So
Wonderful.
Justice joined us a while back for a shmup episode, sort of very kindly as a last minute replacement guest, and yeah, and since then has been sort of been talking to me about getting this episode done. So yeah, finally getting around to it. So I suppose for the people who don't know, what is Toho?
What is Toho?
I mean,
An almost overwhelming question,
yeah,
guys. At heart, we'll start with the basics, though. Toho is a very long-running series of bullet hell shoot 'em ups, and a few other things too. They're not all shoot 'em ups, but for the most part, they're bullet hell shoot 'em ups. They're made exclusively by one person, Mr. Junya Ota, and it and they are a work of and for fans primarily. And I figured I thought it would be very cool for this podcast especially to cover it because this is a podcast about video game music, and there's something very special with this series when it comes to video game music. It interacts with the game in a very unique way that you don't see very often. And I'm very happy to share that with you guys.
awesome. Yeah, no, it's uh, as I say, it's a series that I've always sort of been obliquely aware of, and I've never really got into the main games, but I've played a couple of the side games. As you mentioned, they're mostly shoot 'em ups, but there's a couple of fighting games that I sort of got into playing for a while, and there's a lot of like other sort of weirdo things as well, like there's like 3D arena battle fighters and stuff like that. I don't believe all of those are sort of quote unquote official.
Right.
Because like
It's
only
a
the
little up
official
in
ones
the
are
air,
developed
right?
by Jun. Yeah,
What you wanna call official? I mean, is it the stuff that is made by Zune? Is that what's official? It
yeah,
gets a little weird, like, those arena fighters, he had nothing to do with, right? The fighting games, though, he did. He collaborated with people to make those.
yeah. And as I suppose as sort of fan works, and in many ways sort of the most sort of famous fan series of anything really. Like I don't think there's any sort of fan works that are as well known as this, apart
I
from
would
maybe
think
like
so.
Higurashi at the moment.
I
Like
would
that's
think so.
probably the
If
only
nothing else,
other.
it's probably one of the most long running.
Absolutely, yeah, because this has been going since like the PC 88 days.
Oh,
um
yeah. Yeah, 1995 is when he started working on them,
Wild, yeah.
and he's been doing it pretty much with a few breaks this whole time.
Mm. Yeah, and the ones we're talking about now are sort of the first ones that appeared on Windows PCs. Is that right?
Not quite.
Oh
This
no.
is we are talking about the 10th, 11th, and 12th games today
Yeah.
in the series, and he started making them for Windows with the 6th game in the series.
Oh,
So at
okay.
this point, he'd been making them for Windows for a little
Oh,
while.
okay. Okay. Maybe these were the first
Th-
then that showed up on Steam or something like that. That's maybe where I got my wires crossed on it.
Yeah, as of right now, that's kind of true. I think
Yeah.
maybe the previous game is available on Steam now as well, but
Okay.
I feel like they're always trying to go back and add more over time, so you don't know. I will
Mhm.
say though that this is a very pivotal moment in history for the series in 2007 when it came out.
Oh, I thought you were
At
gonna say
this
this
point,
podcast. I
maybe that too. Maybe that too. At this point, Zune had been working as actually professionally, and Toho had been his side gig. He had been a professional programmer for Taito, and
Okay.
this and actually when this game came out, this is around the time that he quit Taito and made Touhou his full-time day job.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, that sort of marked a
So it's
big
very
change in the
pivotal for that
series.
reason.
Yeah.
The other thing, when I say he made the games by himself, I also include that there's no middleware used, if you
Oh,
understand. Like,
okay,
there's
interesting.
no Unreal Engine or Unity or anything like that. He built the engine too from the ground up for
Yeah.
these games. And one thing that's critical with this game is that everything he had done up to this point, he decided he was going to throw out and start from scratch, starting with this game, Mountain of Faith.
Okay, interesting. So this is sort of like
So it's
a
a brand new, shiny, squeaky engine. In fact, this game in the series is sort of a soft reboot in a lot of ways, and it harkens back to the second game in the series on the PC 98 in a lot of ways, as sort of an intentional callback.
okay, interesting. And have the mechanics changed all that much, or is this sort of like the same mechanics, just polished up a little bit?
So the mechanics, actually, that's interesting you bring that up. The mechanics for this game are kind of simplified compared to how they had been up to this point. And of course, from here on, it starts to get more complicated again. But Mountain of Faith mechanically is one of the simpler titles in the series, actually. And in fact, I would even say for that reason, it's a fairly good entry point for people.
Yeah, I did actually play this one just in the run up to this, just to have a little bit of a run through. And yeah, it plays very nicely. There's some interesting mechanics as far as scoring and stuff like that, but um, it's not as scary, I think, as it sort of looks when you sort of see gameplay on it. I think in the last episode, Reese, when we were talking to you about it, we talked a lot about how about how shmups are sort of, they tend to look scarier than they actually are when you sit down and play
Mhm.
them, and definitely this felt that felt that way for me when I sat down and played this. I think I did the first three stages. Um, but yeah, it was definitely good, and I do want to go back to play some of these in future for sure.
And I'm very glad you've said that because I'd say one of the things that stands out about Toho is that Zune puts a lot of special effort into making it welcoming for lots of people.
Mm,
And actually, the music in particular is one of the key ways in which that is done.
yeah,
It's one of the things that makes it so unique. Uh, the thing is, it's a shoot 'em up, right? The stages are on rails to a high degree,
hmm,
and he takes advantage of that because one thing you'll notice if you place the stages often enough is that the things that happen in the stages are actually synchronized to the music.
yeah,
And that's because one of the big complaints that people have about shmups is, oh, you have to memorize so much. And it's still true. To get good, you still have to memorize. However, because it's synchronized to the music, it gives you an aid. I can't understate or overstate how important that is in your
hmm,
brain working through it. I mean, to the point where even the second or third time that you've seen something, you can start to deal with it just because the musical cues will help you.
yeah. And is that like bullet patterns that would just be that, or is it like enemy movement and everything like that? That
Oh, it's all
also
of it.
is
It's the
everything is
bullet
all
patterns,
synced.
it's when the enemies come out, you'll say, "Hey, this hook's coming up. I know those damn sunflower fairies are about to ambush
Okay,
me."
that's interesting. Yeah. And
So
is the music dynamic in any way? Like, say, for example, if it takes you longer to beat a boss or takes you less time to beat a boss, does that
Oh, yeah,
change?
absolutely, but what's funny is the music itself is not dynamic, he works it the other way around. He makes the stage dynamic.
Oh, okay.
So so actually what happens is if you beat a mid boss real fast, you'll notice there's a few extra waves of enemies that wouldn't
Okay.
normally show up.
okay.
Okay. And is that is obviously a part then I
And
presume of
that's kind of a
score.
hallmark for this whole series too. Everything revolves around the music.
Yeah.
In fact, reading interviews with the man, the first thing he does when he starts a new game is he writes the music
Okay.
before he does any level design or story writing or anything else,
That's fascinating. Okay, I didn't
and
actually
then
know that.
builds the
Rip.
Yeah.
whole thing around the music that he writes.
That's actually, yeah, that's really interesting. And it does you can really feel it through all these games, and any like my biggest experience with this series is definitely just listening to music of it, and like there's such a through line of style and everything for all of these games, so it's really interesting that that's his sort of first protocol. Um, because yeah, I suppose it definitely gives him a framework to operate on then once he sort of once he knows what the music sounds
Mhm.
like. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
And, apparently even the reason he even started making the games in the first place was because he had a strong desire to write music for games. And as he says in his interviews, he didn't know anybody making games, so he said, "Well, I'll make my own." So literally the series is a vehicle for the man's music.
Mhm.
Nice.
And does he do music for the non-official games?
Some.
Some. Okay.
Some, yeah. So, in particular, those fighting games you mentioned, he wrote like just a few, like a handful of original tracks, and
Mhm.
they're with his doofy synthesizer that he writes everything in and everything. And that's notable because the other tracks are technically remixes, and they sound kind of more polished.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the whole remix ecosystem for this series is sort of possibly its own entire
Oh,
podcast in and of itself.
yeah, not just episode,
Yeah.
but entire podcast. Yeah, in
Yeah.
fact, it probably exists.
Definitely. So yeah, I think with that, we'll jump into the first block of tracks anyway. So as you mentioned, the first set of tracks we're listening to are from the game Mountain of Faith, or Touhou Fuujinroku Mountain of Fate. So first track we have is the stage one boss theme. Um, is Because Princess Inada is Scolding Me. I love a lot of
Oh,
these
we can
these
talk about
titles.
that title too
Yeah,
in a minute.
we'll probably talk about like the characters and stuff, because there's a whole other aspect of the series that's probably worth talking about as regards to the characters. So that's definitely something we'll talk about the next block. So yeah, because Princess Inada is Scolding Me, which is stage one boss theme. Dark Side of Fate, stage two boss theme. Youkai Mountain, Mysterious Mountain, that's stage four boss, and then lastly is Cemetery of Onbashira, the Grave of Being, which is the stage six boss theme. I will say the one thing that always jumps out to me whenever I listen to music from this series is just like the amount of fucking arpeggios.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's just constant arpeggios, and it's great. I love it, but it's just like sometimes you're just like, just settle down a little bit with these. They're
No,
like,
never settle down. I understand the need. I feel like that is a very shmup sound that conveys. What it is, I couldn't tell you, but it conveys something about the feeling of
well,
a
it's just that
shmup.
sort of that feeling of movement is probably the biggest thing that it does. It's just that there's no like everything sort of galloping forward,
Hmm.
you know, and
Exactly.
especially
And
because
one thing I'll
most of
also
those were
point
boss
out
themes. Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
in
Justus.
Touhou music, in particular, also key changes. So
Mm.
many key changes.
Yeah, and
But
so many
but he does
trumpet
them so
synths.
well, you don't even notice it really.
Yeah. And are those like do the key changes tend to be just tied to like progression through the stage generally? So like after you've done a boss or after you've done a stage of a boss, then it's sort of like it
Yeah,
switches through.
frequently
Okay, yeah,
in the stage themes especially, yes.
yeah, okay.
But I'd say more importantly, they're tied to just very emotional moments in the tracks themselves.
Mm. Yeah. So speaking of which, you did want to mention, or you want to talk about the title for that first one, because Princess Inada is
Ah,
scolding me.
yes, yes. So this, you might be surprised. You might be actually familiar with this story. So stop me if it's familiar. But the story goes that, uh, oh gosh, what's his name? The younger brother of Amaterasu, Susanoo. That's him, Susanoo. The legend of Susanoo is that he was being a dick in heaven, so they kicked him out,
Okay. Yeah.
and and he runs into some demigods on Earth, and they say, our daughters have been being devoured by this eight-headed, eight-tailed serpent for years, and we're down to only one daughter left. And basically, I'll cut to the chase on it. He saves the day, he slays the beast. It's one of those classic tales.
Hmm.
That daughter's name is Princess Inada,
Oh, okay. Interesting.
and the name of the serpent is Orochi. So you may have come across that one before.
Uh, I suppose through obliquely through the game Okami. Um,
Yeah. I was first introduced to that story in Dragon Quest III,
okay,
where they just
interesting.
straight up lifted the whole story beat and put it in the game.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that at all. I haven't. Not.
Yeah, it even kind of works out the same way. Slay the beast, there's a sword
Mhm.
inside. It's super cool. Everyone has lots of fun.
Classic, really.
But
Yeah.
so Princess Anata becomes the wife then of Susanoo, and Susanoo is sort of a deity of nature, and that's what's going on with this character, right? So that's the tie to the character in the game, right?
Okay.
So this is the boss theme for the Minoriko sisters that you fight, and
Okay.
they sort of represent minor nature deities.
Okay. Interesting. That's fair enough.
But yeah, that's the connection there.
Yeah.
He just mentions Princess Inabe or Inade because it's of the ties to nature. But it's still a fun
Okay.
story to talk about.
Okay. Interesting. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
absolutely. See, it seems like there's a lot of interesting underpinnings going on that are totally going over my head and always will in a lot of this. um,
Oh, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And that's it's funny you bring that up actually. During this time, Zune was actually very hesitant to interact with his growing Western fan base. For kind of that reason, in his head, he felt that it was impossible that Western audiences would understand all these things, and he
Mm.
actually thought it would kind of ruin their enjoyment to not understand.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of it's.
And obviously, in the years since, he's come around and he interacts with his Western fans, and he allows these games to be sold to us because he used to not.
Yeah.
he's
It's a weird thing. Partly that
he's
has to do with Comic
realized
Cat.
that we're morons and we can enjoy anything while understanding nothing. Uh,
But actually, this is a great opportunity for me to talk about the name of the series, Toho. It's a very interesting word in Japanese. The closest equivalent in English is Oriental.
Oh. Okay.
So it's an
Interesting.
adjective meaning kind of Eastern things, kind
Yeah.
of like the word Oriental. But don't make the mistake of thinking it's the word Oriental because it's not.
Yeah.
The thing about the word Oriental in English is it has certain connotations,
Does.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of connotes alienness, foreignness. The word Touhou in Japanese is the polar opposite of that.
Of
It
course,
it
yeah.
connotes it's Eastern familiar. It's familiar and comfortable.
Mhm.
Okay, interesting. I suppose, and for that reason, it does draw a lot on sort of on Japanese folklore and religion, I suppose,
Hmm.
in ways that sort of us stupid Westerners aren't really going to pick up on.
But
Um,
I'll tell you, as a long-running Western fan, that's one of the things that I find most attractive about the series because it was sort of my gateway to a lot of this stuff in a
mm,
real way.
that's interesting. Okay.
I probably wouldn't know everything I know about the legend of Susanoo if I hadn't been introduced through Toho, for instance.
That's yeah. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, that sounds very appealing. It sounds, especially expressed through the medium of waifus. It sounds like it's something where you can, especially because so much of this is about repetition. At least that's my understanding of these games, right? Is that you're supposed to keep playing through them until you get it right. um and
Mhm.
and so it feels overwhelming, kind of just approaching it from the outside. But if you kind of just pick your one, the one that looks cool to you, and kind of just sit with it and just kind of like get to know it inside and out, especially if you can speak the language, you can sort of internalize these themes, that I imagine have to do with, kind of like, vaguely Shinto-esque, or Buddhist themes, something like that, and kind of work from there, and then you go on to the next game that looks cool, and you
Mm.
can draw those parallels. I'm
Right.
I'm speculating here because I am the most outside here,
Well,
but
in, isn't
that's
this
kind of
kind
my
of what,
take.
in a way, isn't this sort of what Japan has done best for a long time? Is to, I think to take concepts that might be heavy or brutal or, and to make them more palatable through cuteness.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tradition in video games that goes back to Space Invaders, the first big international hit from Japan,
Yeah.
because really, Space Invaders is really cute.
When when the West tries to make heavy topics cute, it goes disastrously wrong.
And
You know,
see,
our
that's
our Western games about the Holocaust with waifus are not good. I do not recommend them. So
it's so funny that you bring up that the cuteness sort of makes the gameplay palatable, because I actually wanted to bring up that there's certain concepts that it also makes palatable that would otherwise be very horrifying, actually.
sure.
This is a series that has some real awful monsters in it,
Mm.
but also they have silly hats and they're silly girls. I mean, one of the characters in one of the later games is literally like a congealed 1,000 souls of like, what was it? Stillborn children. Yeah, it's crazy. But also she wears a very cute dress and makes little cute stacks of stones and is very cheerful and Genki.
That's very weird. Yeah, that's yeah.
Right?
Can't can't don't know what to say about that really.
It's very heavy though, right? It's just you don't really consider how heavy it is in the moment,
Mm.
thankfully.
Yeah, that's definitely it. And like, I think I mentioned it during the break, but I do think the sort of a big contribution to why this probably was able to take off in the West is that like, even if you don't understand any of the themes or what the characters actually are or anything, you do have that immediate visual sort of cuteness that sort of that is appealing regardless. Um, and also like the gameplay itself is very simple to understand, even if you might be looking at 10,000 bullets coming down a screen at you. The actual there's a shoot button, there's your bomb button. It's a fairly classic shmup. But I suppose, yeah, it's probably worth talking just broadly about sort of the waifus in this series. You did mention that you wanted to talk about Marissa specifically.
Actually, there's a gameplay reason I wanted to bring her up.
Mm,
So I will bring up Marissa, though. Marissa Kirasami is sort of the default player two of the series,
mhm,
where the default player one being Rei Muhakure. Uh, and those two characters are sort of inverse of each other in a lot of ways. But very briefly, before I get into that, I wanted to talk about something called Marissa Bugged, because
Okay.
we're about to move on from Touhou 10. In Touhou 10 specifically, so you go to select a character when you start, right? If you select Marissa, there's three shot types you can choose. If you choose the B type, there's actually a known bug in this B type, and it's in the player's favor. And I wanted to bring this up because it's so funny. It's never been fixed, never been patched, right? So in the game, you can build power, right? You have power that you build, and you use the power for bombs, etc. Uh, but if you keep your power between 3 and 4, and there's a max of 5, by the way,
Mm.
but if you keep it between 3 and 4, then your unfocused laser does like 10 times damage,
Oh, jeez.
and you can just rip through bosses in no time.
Nice.
Interesting. Okay.
Keep that in mind.
So that's if you ever just wanted to see the endings of the game, that's that, I will say though, it's still not as easy as you would think.
Yeah.
Like the stages especially can still trip you up.
Yeah, I'd imagine like even if you're not paying attention and you're not sort of like, you still need to deal with the bullets coming back down the screen at you, even if you can kill enemies quicker.
Oh, for
You know,
sure.
so
You
it's not
can
just
very
an
easily
instant win
accidentally
button.
slip out of the right power range too.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
true.
I imagine too. I mean, you still have to be able to make your way gently through those bullets. So, which seems to be
Yeah.
the core of the
It does
game.
tend to trivialize the bosses specifically though,
Yeah.
because
Mm.
one of the things about the bosses, when you finish one of their life bars, it tends to clear all the remaining bullets.
Oh, okay. So if you can just get a boss down as quickly as possible, then
You
you
do
don't
also have some
necessarily.
direct control over the power too, because one of the things in this game specifically is you use one of your power levels to do a bomb.
Ah, so you can definitely manage that quite easily. Okay.
Yeah, so if you're overpowered, you can just use a bomb, and now you're
Now
back
you're
in
back
range.
down. Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, and do the characters sort of tend to be the same? Do you get the same playable characters in each game? Does it vary?
There's some consistency, but no. The short answer is no.
Okay.
Each game has some different playable characters.
But would you tend to find then that say like a character that you've played as in previous games would turn up as a boss in another game, or
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
that's good.
In fact,
Okay.
actually, with the exception of Reimu herself, every single playable character has at some point been a boss in the
Oh,
game.
interesting. Okay.
Every last one, even Marissa.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So I suppose yeah.
She was a boss in the second game in the series, and that was her introduction, and she's actually been a playable character, I think, in every single game since.
Oh wow. Okay. That's wild.
So that's the closest you get to a Luigi here.
Fair
And
enough.
well, Reimu, of course, is the Mario to her
Yeah.
Luigi for sure.
Okay. Interesting. Um,
Luigi is a waifu, so this makes a lot of sense to me.
Which is funny, actually, because this game, Mountain of Faith, also has another Shrine Maiden character who, because Reimu, to be clear, is a Shrine Maiden
mm,
who wears red. The other Maiden character also becomes a very frequently playable character, and she wears green. So you'd almost think that's more of a natural Luigi, right?
yeah. Um, the one thing I did actually want to ask is Reese mentioned this when she was talking earlier that the game is sort of a lot about repetition. So do these games tend to have loops like you'd see in other shmups, or is it sort of you play through once and that's it?
No, there's no like loops in the like not like in Gradius, for instance,
Yeah.
or anything like that. Uh, I would say there's a stand-in for the loop though, right?
Okay.
Which is I would say maybe you can if you can play the game on easy mode, there's a sort of a natural progression that you can have, right? There's 4 difficulty modes.
Mhm.
If you can play through on one, you can try the next difficulty up
Yeah.
as sort of a way to keep going, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But no, it's not like and that kind of functions like a loop in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. Right?
Yeah.
And that's also something that's interesting I should bring up too. So every one of these shooting games in the series has 6 stages. That's sort of part of the formula.
Hmm.
But there's also a 7th stage called the extra stage. And usually it varies somewhat, but there's some unlock criteria to the extra stage. It's funny talking about the difficulty of the series because kind of the way it seems to me that it's designed is if you play because there's 4 difficulties: easy, normal, hard, and lunatic. So if you play on normal mode, the second of the two, then I would say, you know, it progresses rather steadily from stage 1 to stage 6, and the extra stage doesn't actually let you select a difficulty, 'cause
Okay.
it's something that you actually do from the main menu of the game.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's like an alternate thing, you know, there's new game and then there's extra stage as a separate menu item, and it just launches you straight in, and, I would say that extra stage is sort of like a normal mode stage 7.
Mm. Okay.
And I think the intent is that you get good enough to beat the game on normal, then you tackle the extra stage, and then if you just want some more, well, he's given you hard mode and lunatic more mode to go to.
That's fair enough. Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah. So to be clear, Reese, as you're not a shmup player, a lot of cave shooters in particular, as we've talked about previously, when you beat the game, you can do another loop, which will like be harder, and will have like maybe different bullet patterns and different maybe extra bosses and things like that.
I remember us talking about that on the shmup episode. So I guess that was my assumption with this, although it does, you know, at the very least, I imagine, unless you are, you know, really good at shmups, you probably work your way up at least from normal difficulty
Mm.
to lunatic. Um,
Yeah, I can't imagine somebody just booting this up and going straight to lunatic.
Yeah, not without a lot of experience, I think.
Mm.
But I mean, and it really, I'm not kidding, it really does function in that way, the different difficulty modes. One thing I want to point out is that all four of the difficulty modes are very clearly, carefully, and separately designed. This is not your thing where, you know how like with some video games they clearly just kind of tweak the formulas and numbers or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not the case here. He's very clearly put some thought, because there are completely different attacks. Some of the bosses have extra spell cards or extra attacks, I should say.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. So there's more to it than number go up, which is yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's good. I suppose
absolutely.
we'll move on to the next game, which is Touhou 11, Subterranean Animism. So I've got 6 tracks in total. I'm going to play 3 now and 3 later. So the first 3 are Awakening of the Earth Spirits, which is the title screen, The Dark Blowhole, which is the stage 1 theme, and Heartfelt Fancy, which is stage 4. Definitely one of the hardest ones to put together, just because every track I heard, I was like, oh, I really want to include this. So I did have to just, at a certain point, just be like, okay, I'm just cutting shit at random.
Yeah, we could have easily done an episode on just one of these games.
Mm.
I think I just had a hard time picking one game, and so that's kind of my fault.
I think I agree, but I also like kind of. I'm certain that people listening to this, are largely not gonna be familiar with it beyond. Oh, that's the waifu game.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So I think kind of having this spread is good, and I think that they're all interesting in their own way. Although I love this one the most, Subterranean Animism.
Oh, really? It's your favorite so far, huh?
Of the ones I listened to, which is
Yeah.
these three.
Well, it was the one you did
It's your favorite
specifically call
soundtrack, I
out a
think.
track from that you wanted to include as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny because, like, to me, like I said earlier, I have a hard time separating the soundtracks from the games they're from,
Mm.
which is something that's done on purpose.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's something I do actually want to sort of swing back on, because you mentioned it sort of in the run up to it, and you mentioned it when we were in the green room as well. But just how all the music is done by the same guy who does everything else in these games, and it's the
Yes.
first thing he does. We like his compositional process is sort of he, he's used. I suppose it hasn't really changed then if he's using the same sort of synths that he's always used from the start.
Yeah, I would say there's a sort of an evolution to it,
Mm,
sort of. Evolution almost implies that it improves, though, but
yeah,
I'd say it changes more than it improves.
yeah. I suppose
But
evolution isn't necessarily better, but yeah,
yeah, but I mean, fair enough. He
yeah.
he gets older, the world changes.
Hmm. But it's like he's still using the same the synths that he's been using since the start.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. The whole time. Well, there was the first 5 games in the series. They were for PC 98. They used the soundboard too from the PC 98 with FM synthesis.
Hmm.
And then starting with the 6th game, all of them are recordings
Yeah, I was
made
going to
with
ask that
a
if
single
there were
synthesizer.
recordings, if there were sort of live MIDI things, or how they were. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a recording of MIDI.
Yeah. But I say it
Uh,
wasn't sort of ported over to PC MIDI or anything like that. It's recorded specifically from the sound hardware that he was using, and then just played
Well, I
back.
should clarify, they have recordings.
Okay.
6, 7, 8, and 9 also have MIDI options, so you can play MIDI soundtracks in those games.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you can
But
you
that
can get
option
in.
actually disappears starting with Mountain of Faith onwards, and you can only play the recordings now.
Yeah. Well, I suppose as PCs have sort of gone on, they don't. Can you even play a MIDI without like external software
Right.
anymore? Like I remember my first PC had like the little Windows 95 MIDI player that you could open up. Um, but I don't even know if like my Windows 9 or my Windows 10 PC has the ability to play MIDI. Which is interesting now that I think of it.
Uh, it does, but it might be hard to use.
Yeah,
It is the short version of that.
that's fair enough.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, there's basically, like I've been saying, he's written all of these things for kind of one synthesizer. It is an Edirol SD90 that he uses.
Okay, I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about that, it's Edirol is sort of a subsidiary of Roland,
Okay.
and it might make more sense if I tell you the nickname. The nickname is Studio Canvas.
Oh, the SC. Okay, right. Yeah, I am familiar with that. Sorry.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they're actually called, but these are SD 90s that I'm talking about.
Okay.
But yeah, the Sound Canvas was the famous SC, very
Yeah.
famous.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And so
Yeah.
the Studio Canvas was sort of an attempt. It's sort of a reboot of that from a hardware perspective. What's funny is the sound canvases, they all, like, up to that point, they all kind of had, like, the newer ones had all of the older ones sounds, like they were backwards compatible.
Yeah.
Uh, the Edirol SD synthesizers are that is not the case. They have brand new sound ROMs and they're not backwards compatible,
Okay, interesting.
which is it's kind of interesting. So you lose a lot that way, but it also means they have a very unique sound in and of themselves.
Yeah, no, they definitely like the synths that you can hear through these definitely are they have their own sort of unique timbre to them. Um,
Yeah.
that is not quite what you'd expect from like the SC
Yeah.
stuff that I've
So
heard
that's an
before.
interesting point to bring up. The Sound Canvas series was huge in the 90s. It
Yeah.
was that sound was in a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
The Edirol SD 80 and 90, by contrast, was not popular. It did not
Mm.
do well. You do not hear it a lot. It's almost, I'd say its sound is almost exclusively associated with Toho music.
Yeah, definitely. Like, because you played some earlier through your own mic that like
Right.
the
So
second you
for the
played it, it
listeners,
immediately sort of like yeah.
I should point out that I do have in front of me right now an SD80. It's not an SD90. So Zune uses an SD90. An SD80 is the exact same synthesis engine. The SD90 just also has a sound card,
Oh, okay, okay.
Mhm.
and that's really the only difference. But I have the exact same sound engine right in front of me. It's too much power for one man to have. And just to demonstrate, you probably I know the listeners have been probably noticed that doofy trumpet sound that he uses
Hmm.
all the time. I can make that right now. Oh, that's a piano sound. That one, that trumpet sound.
That trumpet sound is yeah, it's great. I love it. It's
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 so doofy.
yeah,
It's so doofy because it's a recording of somebody playing trumpet with a wild vibrato. And
yeah.
I think if I play this specific note, it's almost normal sounding, like maybe that's the original recording. But if I start going up, it starts getting dumber
Yeah.
and
Wow.
dumber
Yeah.
because the vibrato just keeps getting faster and faster.
Yeah.
And so by the time you get up here,
Oh wow.
it's it's just
Doesn't
ridiculous,
even
right?
sound like a trumpet anymore. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
insane. That's mad.
And what's funny is Zune doesn't shy away from some of those high trumpet notes either, even though
Yeah.
it sounds so ridiculous. But it's such a big and iconic part of the sound.
Yeah. And is it all sample based or is it like is there
Oh,
pure
totally. Yes.
synthesis?
Yes.
Okay.
This is what's known in the synthesizer world as a rompler.
That's an incredible word.
Yes, that's sort of a derisive nickname for these kind of synthesizers. It means that there's a ROM inside that has recordings that it plays that basically, as you play higher notes, it shortens the recording to make the higher pitch,
Oh,
and it
okay.
stretches them out to make lower pitches.
Interesting.
It's sort of among synth nerds, it's used derisively because you don't have very much control, like
Yeah.
very direct control over the sound. On like a more analog type synthesizer, like a subtractive synth, you can actually
Mm.
do a lot to design the sound. But
Oh, okay.
with a
That
rompler,
was
you're
going to
kind
be
of
my next
stuck with.
question then was like, can you do like different are you sort of stuck with the samples that are built in?
You're
Yeah.
stuck with the samples that are built in. You can sort of there's ways you can work around it to some degree. Like you can assign filter envelopes, you can
Mm.
change the attack and release characteristics. There's DSP engines where you could add distortion. You can do some things to add character, but
Yeah.
in terms of the base sound design, you're stuck with what you've got.
Fascinating. Okay, that was a really good education on synths. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this episode as well because when you being on is by far the most educational episodes that we have.
Yeah.
I feel like, we can assign this in the shmup episode and a class for extra credit
Yeah.
at the very least.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely helpful to have somebody on who like really understands the concepts because like I have a basic sort of grasp of it, in that I know the
Mhm.
difference between like sample based synthesizers and subtractive synthesizers and such. But like other than that, like the mechanics of it and the engineering of it, I think you definitely have a better grasp on it and it's really good to have somebody who has that knowledge on the show.
Yeah, it's you, Justice. You are the synth and music expert. I'm the waifu expert, and Tom is just right in between.
Just somewhere in the
Uh,
middle. Yeah,
I've noticed we have some pretty smart music people in our community as well.
oh,
it's
absolutely,
true. Yeah, no,
absolutely.
definitely. Yeah, the Discord
I
has a
just
lot
count
of.
myself lucky to be among the number here.
No, to be fair, I've got a lot of very good smart sort of music knowers in the Discord, which is very good. I feel quite pleased about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It's the honestly, sorry for the tangent, but the coolest thing about the Discord is whenever people post their original stuff. I know
Mm.
you posted sort of like a rebuilt kind of synthesizer cover of that E song, I believe. Justice.
Yeah, Winged
That
Voice.
was fucking incredible. That's maybe the coolest thing that's been posted in the Discord. But like whenever
Oh, I had a
anybody is
lot of fun
posting
with
their
that.
original stuff, it's great.
Yeah, it's
I had a
really.
lot of fun with that. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, that was a great one. But yeah, I think with that we'll jump into the next block, which is just another 3 tracks from Subterranean Animism, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the sort of the plot and the interconnected world
Yes.
building and stuff like that in the next block. Then, because you mentioned stuff about that previously, and I really want to talk a bit more about it. But I think this section is going to run on too long if we don't jump into some music right away. So the first track, which is the one that Reese requested, is
this
Green Eyed Jealousy, which is the stage 2 boss theme. Then we have Corpse Voyage, Be of Good Cheer, which is the stage 5 boss theme. And then we have Energy Daybreak Future Dream, which is the staff roll theme.
The staff role is kind of interesting in Toho too, because as you know, the staff isn't very long.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question actually.
It's not so there's some other stuff in there, and one of the things that tends to be in there is Zune will tend to leave a personalized message to the player.
Okay, interesting.
In fact, that's one thing that's interesting. He tries to have sort of a personal relationship of sorts with the
Hmm.
player, and a lot of that comes in through his message. The message is actually different too, depending on how well you played.
Okay, interesting. That's cool. Yeah, because it's like we, we maybe mentioned it early on, but like it's a very unique series in that I don't think there's any series that is as long running and as sort of well regarded and as popular as this that is just done by one person. Um,
Including the engine.
yeah, like just where the whole thing is just one person and that it's never really been delegated to other people. And despite that, there's still so much sort of peripheral work that you can just find and fan work and like all the fan arrangements and everything like that. It's a really interesting sort of ecosystem of a game or of a series that like incredibly unique. I think even within the sort of Doujin sphere.
And something else I'd like to point out, these 3 games in particular, each one of them was made in 1 year apiece.
Wow,
That pace is grueling.
yeah, that's pretty that's pretty
When he got
tough.
a little older, he slowed down. Now he
Mm,
takes 2 years for each game.
that's still pretty like if you're
Yeah, it's
pumping those
still
out at
crazy,
that
but
rate, like that's pretty
what's funny is the only reason he slowed down is because he does other things now that he didn't used to do. He
okay.
also writes manga, he makes print work, he collaborates with lots of people. He just collaborated this last year with Toby Fox.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember reading
Wonderful.
about that actually. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's sort of like an example too of why it's actually a good idea to not churn through video game labor like their chum. Because like if you actually become comfortable and get in a good working groove, like our man here, it's like clearly, I think this is a singular example, but since this is all he does, he lives, eats, and breathes shmups. Like I'm sure he can put he's just able to put one together on a level that I think most game developers would not be able to. Would kind of like is productive, and that productivity causes less burnout because it's his baby. Um, he's telling the story that he wants to. It's and
And
he seems
himself
incredibly
is
well adjusted for all of that. Just in the
oh, I was
sense
gonna
like I
say he
find I find his policy towards the fans to just being like sort of like, yeah, do whatever. Just don't get stupid, but you can do whatever.
oh, he's very laissez-faire with it for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, he lets people straight up make money off of his intellectual property. It's crazy.
Hmm.
There's countless numbers of Toho derivative products you can find for sale right now on Steam.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I did want to run back and we'll talk about the actual world of Toho. So like something
Mhm.
you mentioned early on was sort of how the world building is something that really appeals to you about this series.
Absolutely. And for people listening in, I will say a lot of this is not really enumerated in the games per se, but there's a number of print works. There's manga, of course, but there's also like prose-based works too,
Mm.
and that's a lot where this comes in. He's also very prosy, oddly enough, in things like README files that he sticks in with the games,
Okay.
and liner notes that because there's official music CDs too, right? And a lot of it is in the liner notes for the music CDs.
Okay.
It's just kind
Interesting.
of scattered all over the
Yeah.
place. For your sanity, I would recommend looking all of it up in en.tohowiki.net though.
Yeah. That's I've
'Cause it's all collected there. It's all translated to English for the most part.
excellent. Yeah. No,
Uh,
I've been browsing it for a while, and there's so much information here. Yeah.
Oh, it's overwhelming, but I would recommend just grabbing one of the print works because they're just a lot of them are just they're very fun. They are most of them are written from the point of view of an unreliable narrator,
Hmm.
which I think makes it extra fun. Because you don't know if it's the truth, what's
Yeah.
being said. But yeah, but they're a lot of fun. I mean, I could think of much worse ways to spend an hour or two. But having said that, I don't think there's any real way to approach the world of Toho without talking about Gensokyo. So Gensokyo is sort of the world in which all of these stories happen. Uh, what exactly it is physically is sort of left up to imagination, but it's sort of, you can think of it as sort of a mystical Narnia, perhaps.
Okay.
It's another world, and so the story goes is that at some point in the past, all these mythical creatures were real, right? All these yokai were on Earth. These yokai and these monsters and these spirits and gods. But over time, humans became more and more logical and rational and stopped believing in them. And basically, they only exist because people believe in them.
Okay.
And so, as this belief starts to fade, so too do these mythological legends and creatures. And so there's this very specific character, Yukari Yakumo, and she apparently takes it upon herself to sort of uh, create this concept of Gensokyo. And there's the it's like I said, it's sort of a realm, and there's a barrier around it, right? And basically the only nothing comes in and nothing goes out, with a few notable exceptions. And one of those being that if any being that is a legend in the midst of fading can obviously come in, but then once in can never leave. And then of course there's other exceptions too, like if something goes wrong with the barrier.
Okay.
So that being stated, uh, the barrier itself is called a barrier of reason, I think is how it's described.
Okay.
Everything on our side of the barrier is rational and reasonable, and on the other side is where things that are not reasonable can live. And for this reason, Gensokyo does have a human population. There's a human village inside of Gensokyo, and they're very important because if they need to be there to believe in everything that's around. That's their point.
Okay.
Okay.
Without their belief, everything goes away. It doesn't work.
That's yeah. Because yeah, you mentioned in one of the breaks the one of the characters Reimu, like her ability is um sort of can interact with both physical things and metaphysical things,
And that's
which
not
seems to be
uncommon
sort of
with
in line
with
with
yeah,
the way that world is constructed, I suppose.
very much on that side of the border of reason, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Let me talk a little bit about that character, that sort of the main character of the series, Reimu Hakure. She is a Miko, which is we often translate as Shrine Maiden.
Hmm.
That's a very interesting. It's a functional role within the Shinto religion. Uh, it's not exactly like a nun, uh,
Mm.
but it's not exactly like a priest either.
Yeah.
But something kind of in between. If the best way I can explain it is if you imagine that a nun is sort of like a nurse and a priest is like a doctor, then a Miko is sort of like a nurse practitioner.
Okay.
Okay.
So her charge is the Hakure Shrine. It bears her family name Hakure. And the point of that shrine is to maintain sort of a semblance of order within Gensokyo, but more vitally and importantly, to maintain the barrier.
Okay.
And if it's said to have any sort of entry point, that shrine is it.
Okay, that's wild.
So
Yeah.
if you're like a powerful being that's trying to rip a hole in the barrier, that's where you're going to go.
Okay, and that's why you end up playing as her quite a lot.
And
Okay.
it's an interesting concept. It's a barrier that apparently extends in a dome shape, and also it goes underground, and also has certain tunnels to other sort of mythical worlds in and of itself as well. There's a parallel mythical moon world that gets interacted with, and you can travel there directly from Gensokyo without having to go through Earth.
I see. Okay, well, it's so you actually did mention, come to think of it now, when you mentioned the underground, like that the last game we were talking about, subterranean animism, is sort of
Exactly. Yes.
is related to that in that it's about somebody having a nuke. Are they trying to break
Yes,
through the
yes.
barrier using that nuke? Is that what's going on, or?
So something I should point out here. Up until this point in the series, before the 10th game in the series, each of the stories weren't particularly connected with each other. But starting with the 10th game, the story beats tend to flow from one to the next. So, having said that, in subterranean animism, the plot goes that there's a lot of there's these earth spirits that are flowing from underground, and nobody quite knows why, and it brings with it a lot of heat. And at first, the human characters are ecstatic, and they decide to use it to make a spa, and they're not worried about the earth spirits. But some of the more powerful characters around, like the aforementioned Yukari Yakumo, gets concerned. It's like, no, we need to know what's happening here, and so they basically send Reimu or Marissa, depending on who you pick, underground to go check it out. And that's how things get kicked off. And cutting to the chase, skipping a lot of plot that happens in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, you find out that Kanako, who was the main boss from the previous game, had visited and had granted the power of a sun god to a hell raven in a decommissioned hell underground. And this hell raven basically becomes drunk with power. And basically, when the characters find her, she says, "I have to use this amazing power." And it's the power, by the way, of nuclear energy because it uses a sun's fusion energy, right? So, obviously it's bad news.
Yeah,
She says, "I have to go to the surface and I have to express this power," meaning I'm going to annihilate everything.
yeah. Okay,
In the end, the story goes, when you beat her as the final boss, she decides to calm down just because the player character is more powerful than her, and she respects that.
fair enough.
Wow.
Right? But the reason the previous final boss had done this in the first place was because she was trying to introduce nuclear power into the Gensokyo as an energy source.
Just as an enemy. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, fair enough. All right.
Yeah, it interacts kind of interestingly with certain of the characters too.
Hmm,
There's another character, Nitori, who is an engineer and a kappa. One of the things with subterranean animism, you pick either Reimu or Marissa to play as, but you can also pick one of three partners, and it affects your shot type and the bombs that you have,
mhm.
and also the dialogue and certain other things in the game too. And Nitori is one of the selectable assistants. And as an engineer character, she's very interested in what because kind of her hobby is getting things that manage to make their way into Gensokyo from the outside world and to take them apart and figure out how they work. And she obviously has a great interest in nuclear power. I do want to touch back on this idea of Gensokyo being a haven for forgotten myths, though,
Yeah,
because this extends further than just like mythical creatures. But even things like CRT televisions might make their way into Gensokyo as they become less relevant to the outside world.
that's
Okay,
amazing. I
that's
love
that's
that.
where you got to go to get them.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
That's
absolutely.
where the key.
Things like ancient computer systems, forgotten music, anything that the world has
That's
moved on
fascinating.
from.
Okay, that's a really cool little sort of twist on the concept. Yeah, I like that.
So
Yeah.
so do the newest Toho games have CRT waifus that you fight as bosses, something like that, or is that or does it work like that?
Not that I have seen so far. Not that I can. I mean, to be fair, I think I had brought this up at some point in our private Discord. But the latest they have annual character contests
Hmm.
for character popularity. The
Mm,
last one had 216 characters to choose from.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if there's not one among the 216 characters, the three of us can make our own. We'll just make like a single level game about
Yeah,
fighting the CRT sound
CRT
system.
waifu.
I don't know what to say because I've this series goes back about 30 years,
Sure.
and I've personally been a fan of it for about 20 of those years, and I still couldn't probably name all the characters.
That's fair.
I it would be crazy if you could. Um,
Yeah, it's nuts. Some of those are whatever though. Some of those entries, I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot going on. So I think we'll jump into the last game then. So again, like Subterranean Animism, I have six tracks in total, three in one block, three in the next. So the 12th game is called Undefined Fantastic Object. One thing I do actually love is the titles for all these games are wild. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
who officially translates these or if there are any like official translations, but
Undefined Fantastic Object is not a translation. It is English. That was Zun's
oh, okay.
original
So
title
that
in
was in the
English.
actual okay,
Wonderful,
fantastic. I love that.
wonderful.
Okay.
Undefined Fantastic Object is such a fucking funny title. I'm so
Yeah,
glad
because
to
it's
hear
like
that.
it makes sense, but it's not the way you would use that in English. That's really interesting.
Right.
Like, yeah. Uh,
There's a lot of. I agree that the titles there's a lot of pluses here to the
yeah.
games. The very first one, I think it's the first Toho game, is just called like highly receptive to prayers. That's such a funny that's such a funny idea. Just being like, listen, we need somebody who's highly receptive to prayers. That's on the top. That's on the top of the deity list. Jesus, not doing it lately. We need to find the CRT goddess. That's anyways.
I want to point out real quick. Technically, the title of that game is The Highly Receptive to Prayers, which is
Oh,
even better.
okay.
So it's a title. Okay. That's funny. Okay, well, we'll jump into the first few tracks here from Undefined Fantastic Object. First one is Stage One theme, which is at the end of spring, or at the harbor of spring. Um, then I have a tiny, tiny, clever commander, which is the first stage boss theme for the character Nazrin, and then the stage two theme, which is the sealed cloud route. you were talking about sort of the differences with this one, or sort of there's a bit of a shift in the series with this game. Mechanically, is it the same more or less, or?
So somewhat of a shift mechanically, in terms of the gameplay. So where like the 10th game in particular, uh, is sort of simplified, it starts to become a little bit more complicated here.
Hmm.
So one of the big things is this UFO mechanic that they introduce in this game. And basically, the UFOs are these little, they're what you think. They're like little flying saucers, and there's three different colors of them that fly around. There's red ones, there's green ones, and there's blue ones. And basically, first of all, that already makes it because they kind of float around, and if you don't collect them in a certain amount of time, they fly off the screen and you miss a chance. So sometimes you're having to like dodge bullets, but even worse, most of them change colors. And so if you're trying to collect a specific color, there's only a certain time window to do it, and it
Okay.
might be behind heavy fire it just makes it very chaotic, right?
Okay.
Mhm.
But basically, if you collect three of them that are red in a row, you have a chance to get bonus lives. If you collect three of them that are green, you have a chance to get bonus bombs. If you collect three of them that are blue, you have a chance to get bonus score. And then there's sort of a special case if you get one of each color,
Okay.
which is and I need to explain a little bit. Whenever you collect three, what it does is it actually spawns a giant UFO mini boss on the screen that has its own little health bar. And while that's on the screen, it'll actually soak up all of the power up items that would normally appear. And there's a time limit. And if the time limit runs out before you defeat it, then you lose all of those items. They're gone. But if you do defeat it, then you get all of the items and usually some kind of bonus. And in particular, if it's a blue one, then you get 8 times the normal score value for all the score items. And so with the one that's multicolored, though, that's sort of a special case. You get 4 times the value of points, except power items and point items get flip flopped. So the power items become worth points and the point items become powers.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
So in other words, it's sort of a scoring mechanic, right? If you use those ones. But that's what's interesting about the system. It's potentially a scoring mechanic, but it's also potentially a survival
Yeah.
mechanic because you can use it to get lives and bombs
Yeah.
too.
That's good. Like I always like that's one thing I like in sort of in good shmups is where they give you a good balance between like scoring and survival stuff and sort of um
But man, let me tell you, I have a real love-hate relationship with the UFOs in that game.
it does
It's
seem
so
from what you
chaotic.
described that they can be a little bit annoying. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they can be for sure. Well, especially, you can get if you're trying to survive, you're trying to get like all reds, right? You want to get all lives. And then if you pick up two reds and you accidentally pick up a green, oh, it fucks everything up because now you have to get three more reds because they go kind of in serial in order, right? That's what's interesting if you're playing for score. There's actually points I think purposefully designed in the stages where where all the drops will be point items, and then there's different parts of the stage where all the drops will be power items.
Okay.
And the intent is you can design a route where you maximize picking up
Each
either
of
the
them.
mixed color
Yeah.
UFOs or the blue ones to maximize score.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
But of course, on top of that, every time you do that, there's also an opportunity cost because that was an opportunity you could have spawned a red or a green one to get more resources.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what's kind of going on mechanically in this particular game. I will say the other thing is that the old school style bombs also make a return. In Touhou 10 and 11, the bombs are very simplified. They tend to just be like a little circle that clears the bullets and does damage. But in this game, it kind of goes back to being like big flashy attacks like it used to be.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but also you have like a spell card stock in this game. That was also not true in the previous two games. I think I had mentioned earlier in the previous two games, the cost of using a bomb is you drop a power level.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the case here. In this game, you actually have a discrete stock of bombs.
Okay. Now I will actually invite you at this point to explain spell cards because you've mentioned them a few times and I sort of know what they are. But maybe just for the listeners to actually explain what spell cards are.
Potentially a very big topic, but spell cards basically, I've been calling them bombs up to this point, but in game they're properly referred to as spell cards. But they're not just the player's bombs, but they're also kind of the named attacks that the boss characters have as well. And it sort of ties into this larger system called Danmaku,
Yeah.
which is also a very central concept to this series. So Danmaku sort of refers to the bullets in the bullet hell, so to speak.
Yeah.
They're the attacks. Uh, and I'll admit, I don't know, I'm not sure I even I have the strongest concept of it necessarily, but as best as I can tell, the creatures in Gensokyo, some of them have just OP abilities, just things that can, like Dragon Ball type shit, stuff that can end the universe. And so apparently in an attempt, and there's conflicts that happen, right? So in an attempt to address this, apparently they came up with something called the spell card rules and the Danmaku rules.
Mm.
And basically I think the idea is that Danmaku can basically be anything. It can be a concept that exemplifies one's character, but it can also be real abilities that they have.
Mm.
For instance, the harvest goddess from Touhou 10 shoots bullets at you that are just sweet potatoes because she's a harvest goddess.
Makes
Wonderful.
sense. Love it.
So that's not like an ability, right? That's not like a magic she has. It's her custom Danmaku, right?
Yeah.
But so anyways, there's like this list of rules that you follow, and one of those is for these abilities you must write down exactly what they are on a piece of paper in the form of a
Okay.
contract. And basically this contract is what you use when you use that ability.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm actually glad you brought up the term Danmaku because I had seen it on the wiki as like a proper noun. I'm familiar with that word as like the name for the genre in general, as like the bullet hell genre. But like I
Yeah, I
wasn't.
think it's a name associated with Japanese bullet hells in
Yeah,
particular.
specifically. Yeah,
Translates literally in English to curtain fire.
yeah. Um, but I was curious then how that actually translated in game as a mechanical term because yeah, I hadn't seen that until this evening when I was looking through the wiki. So I'm glad that you clarified that.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see it's fairly central to all of this stuff,
Mm,
right?
yeah, it's a sort of a consonance between the mechanics and the story that sort of that I think works pretty nicely for it. Yeah.
I
Um,
am I have been hanging on as tightly as I can, trying to understand what this is from the outsider. They mentioned the cards when I'm watching the playthroughs, but also feel like it's probably the type of thing where it makes sense because it's in Toho games, and since it's in Toho games, it makes sense. It's and kind of changes from game to game a bit. So that's kind of like how I'm taking it. Um, the one question I guess you've answered, but I like I was curious about is how much of a variant there is between game to game, and if they're just like building on the same formula, or they kind of change it, and each one is a slightly different gameplay feel, and sort of like do people just sort of like say, oh, unidentified fantastic object is my favorite one because I love the UFO system the most, or these particular ones end up being people's favorites because they have a particular flow they like, something like that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'd say there's actually some fairly vast differences from game to game. Most of them have some sort of unique mechanic to them that sort of gives it its own unique character. Uh, like the UFO system never shows up again.
Hmm.
It's just in that one game, right?
just okay. That's yeah.
And obviously people have their favorite waifus as well. So that probably influences people's thinking about what their favorite game
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, I'd say it's very legit to have a favorite based on your favorite music.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.
So given how much the music sort of ties into the gameplay. Yeah, that does make
Yeah,
sense.
it's sort of a total package, right, from one game to the next.
Mm. Yeah, so is
It's
that
a total package, yeah.
yeah, that'll probably make it easier for somebody who's interested to sort of maybe just pick a game and jump in.
Right.
Um,
Oh, so on that note, I do want to say that that is exactly what you should do. A lot of these games are one of the other reasons I wanted to do these 3 games is because they are available on Steam.
yeah,
That's not the case with some of the earlier titles in the series. So you can purchase these legit. And you might be tempted to say, "Oh, they're kind of expensive," because they're $15 a piece, and there's a lot of them. Uh, I would invite, if that's a thought you have, I would invite you to sort of adjust your thinking just a little bit, because I would say don't think of purchasing the entire series. Don't treat it as like this monolithic thing. Instead, I would say the proper way is to pick one and to spend some quality time with that one. If you do that, I think any one of these is worth $15 easily.
Yeah,
yeah,
you're not gonna buy you don't buy every Final Fantasy at once. You pick one and you get into it, and then you decide whether or not you liked it, and then you buy six. Uh,
Exactly, and I know it's tempting. It's tempting to think of a shoot 'em up as being a little different because if you're good at the game, or you can look up on YouTube somebody playing through it, right? And a playthrough is maybe 25 minutes,
yeah,
and you might be tempted to think, oh, well, that's 25 minutes of game, right? But it's
yeah,
the wrong way to look at it, right?
yeah. No, it's like, yeah, obviously with the repetition we mentioned and just sort of learning the patterns and like a single playthrough of these games is not really it's not like when you play through BioShock Infinite and you're like, all right, I've played that game and I'm never going to touch it again. Like, the point of these games is to keep going through them and sort of to learn your
Right,
routes and either if you want to do like go for score attacks or go for like 1 credit clears and things like that. They're like,
right. There's a lot of ways to approach it.
mhm.
And ideally, the deal is that you approach it with is I want to spend some time in this world, with these characters, with
mm,
this music, with these patterns, right? I want to keep coming back and
yeah,
and and improve my familiarity
yeah.
over time.
And then you have like, your sort of like flow state stuff as well, where you like where you allow yourself to just sort of become encompassed by the game. Um
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
Oddly enough, this is actually one of the things that got me into the series in the first place. Actually, like I said, I've been a fan of this series for 20 years, and I am in my 40s.
Mm,
So I was in my 20s when I was introduced to it, and kind of when I was introduced to this series, I was kind of just starting out my professional career. And I found that, up until this point in my life, I had played a lot of very long games, like a lot of RPGs,
mm,
and things like that, and I would play, multiple hours at a time. I mean, how do you make any real progress in Xenogears without sitting down for 3 hours at least,
yeah,
right?
it's
Mhm.
not a game you can just pick up in short bursts. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is part of the appeal of shmups more broadly, I think, to me, is I had this epiphany that I was like, "Hey, this is something I can enjoy, as sort of a reward. Like I can, if I finish some task and I need to chill, I can chill for 20 minutes. It doesn't mess up my whole day,
You can
right?"
play it on your coffee break, like
Yeah, for as deep as you can go with it, it's kind of
yeah.
amazing, but it's kind of a more casual experience, really.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, I think that's a factor that maybe people don't necessarily consider when they're sort of looking at these games as a value proposition. But yeah, like
Right,
just
right.
like the fact that they're short is actually to their advantage as well, because I can't imagine playing one of these games for like 3 hours. Like, you might maybe if you're doing like really, really practicing a run or something like that, but like I
I think I'd be
yeah,
overstimulated
they
after
like
3
you would
Yeah.
hours because they're very stimulating
yeah,
games.
exactly. Like I think like half an hour, maybe an hour on these games is all I'd play in like one sitting, and like I might do like a couple of sittings in a day depending on the game. But like it's like you turn it on, you maybe do a run through, and then you go and do something else, and then come back to it later or
Mm.
something.
I
Um
will say, sadly, these 3 games do not have spell card practice. Starting with the next game, 10 Desires, they have something called spell card practice where you can play one attack You can practice one boss attack over and
Okay.
over
And you
again.
can, yeah.
But
Okay,
the
interesting.
best these 3 games have for you is a stage select that you can do. You can do a stage practice.
I mean, that's still, I think, yeah,
I think that's
that's
still
pretty fair.
pretty. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Though I guess it's also fair to mention that, oddly enough, Touhou 8, the earlier game in the series, did also have spell card practice, and they took it away for some reason with these 3, and then brought it back.
Interesting. Okay.
I also do want to point out these games, they're available on Steam. As I mentioned, they are in Japanese. In fact, I actually had to go tweak with my Steam settings to even find them because I was apparently only finding games in English.
Yeah, there'll be a big warning slapped on there. I
Right.
just feel like this
Now,
is not an English game.
that being
Gaijin.
stated, you can play I'd say they're shmups. They're enjoyable
Yeah.
even without being able to read them. The menus tend to be in English too. But if you want, there are translations available as
Mm,
well. Listeners, you can Google for it. It's fairly easy to find.
yeah. I mean, none of these games. I have plenty of like Japanese only cave shooters and stuff on the Xbox 360, and like they're all in Japanese. You just sort of, they're not that difficult to figure out. Which
I
is
will say there's a translation engine in particular that's kind of funny. I think it's called Toho Patch Center, and sort of the way they approach translation is they made it a collaborative effort that's fed from a wiki. So what it does is it actually goes live and grabs translations from a
oh
wiki, which is
interesting.
kind of a
Okay,
wild
that's wild.
concept.
Yeah, that's
And of course, like any wiki, anybody can go in and edit it, and it can be reviewed, right? So the translation can change almost any time.
okay. That's
But
pretty cool.
what's funny is that there's also like there's many languages available, like just an outstanding number of different languages. But there's also like joke translations too, and there's other like weird mods that you can do through their program. It's kind of wild to play with.
Good. That's
Awesome.
I
very
just
cool.
wanted to point that out
Yeah, no,
real
that's
quick.
that's a really like I've never heard of anything doing that before. That's really really cool.
I think one of the available translations is Pirate English. And by the way, there's also like British English as a separate translation.
Okay, interesting.
And I think there's like literal English, which is what it sounds like it is.
Okay, that's that is sort of interesting that you can do that. Like, and especially it seems like you can sort of patch on the fly as you go, which sort of gives you you can sort of experiment and see what you actually like. That's a really cool
Yeah, there's
concept. Yeah,
there's a lot of options out there
yeah,
for how you want to play these games.
very cool. All right, so we're going to jump into the last block of tracks here. So first one I have is Captain Murasa, which is the stage 4 boss theme. I have the Fires of Hokkai, which is the stage 6 theme, and I have Returning Home from the Sky, which is another one of the staff roll themes. that last one is just so much more soothing than some of the previous
Ten-
tracks, in a great way.
10,000%. I don't know. It was giving me like almost like the closing song to like a 70s sitcom vibe, but Toho. It ripped. Excellent
Yeah,
choice.
it's great.
And
Yeah.
I had mentioned this when we were off air a little while ago, but this is actually a call. The theme in this one is a callback to the actual final boss theme. So
Mm,
you can almost think it's like a slowed down, like a chilled out version of the final boss theme that you've just been listening to.
yeah. No, it's cool. I suppose if you take nothing away from this, go and listen to these soundtracks. Like go find them in full. They're like I was discussing with Reese and Justice beforehand how like this is a really difficult one for me to put together a playlist for, because I wanted to include almost every single track. And this episode is already running pretty long as it is, so I can't imagine how long it would have been if I was a little less harsh in my edits.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm prepping for the podcast, I can kind of tell, like listening through it, which one Tom is gonna pick for it. And I can just be like, well, I'll see if this is on the playlist. If not, I'd like to suggest it. Then I look on there, and of course it's on the playlist. This one, it was just like I had no idea because they're all bangers, and it's just like that they all kind of none of them except like for situations like this where this one is kind of like amusingly chill. They don't like
Yeah,
stand out from each other in like a specific way
yeah,
other than the fact that they're songs with different sounds and but they all bang in their
yeah,
own way. It's cool.
And I'll reiterate, if you want them to stand out, the best way to listen is to play the games they're from.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's also
I
true.
know I
Yeah,
know people don't have a lot of time sometimes, but man, if you can, I recommend it.
definitely. And so, as I mentioned, this episode is running long, so I reckon we should probably um, try and sort of close this up. I was going to ask you, Justice, about some of the in between games that some of these have, but I think maybe just for the sake of brevity, we won't. We might save that for a future episode on Toho, because I don't. I feel like this is something we'll definitely want to come back to in the future.
Oh, I'm down.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, with that being said, if you want to do any plugs or if you have anything going on that you'd like people to know about, here's your opportunity.
You bet. I'd like to take this opportunity to shout out all of the amazing Toho fans through the decades. As great as what Zune himself has put out there for us to enjoy, it's been only augmented by all of everyone's tireless hard work.
Yeah.
Is there okay? What is? Can you pick out a single fan remix or album or something like that to if we want a specific fan thing? What's the best one?
Absolutely not. No, no way. That's too difficult.
Understood. Understood.
I would say, in a way, what you should do is, let's say there's a type of music that you like, put put in the name of that genre of music and the word Toho and see what comes up. I almost guarantee you it
There's almost
exists.
certainly a remix album in whatever genre you want to think of. Yeah,
Toho Electroclad.
Oh yeah, it's probably
yeah,
there.
it's probably there. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably there. I will say, I will like to shout out Dematory in particular. They're sort of a heavy metal math rock kind of thing that does Toho remixes. They've been around a long time. I love them.
Okay, I'll definitely I'll include a link in the notes. Cool. Okay, and Reese, tell the people about what you've got going on.
You can check me out on Twitter or Blue Sky at Reese V Ryder. Also, you can check out my other podcast, Video Games Are the Worst Thing on Earth, which has been transmogrified into a podcast that releases more often and charges you money for the premium episodes now. But it's we've released 2 episodes in a week, which is unfucking precedented for
Yeah, I
us.
couldn't believe you did that.
And we're hoping to be a bit more on the ball with it, so you can expect a whole lot more from us. So check that out.
Fantastic.
And
Do yeah.
I'll skip the existential warfare.
Eventually, we'll get another episode, and I'm looking forward to whenever we do.
Yeah, I got Conky on the docket. We're gonna do it.
Nice, excellent. Yeah. I still going to come and talk about Jamiroquai or something on that.
No, definitely something. For
Yeah.
sure.
Um,
And what
yeah.
about you, Tom? What about us?
Us, yeah. You can find me pretty much just on Blue Sky, forpush.bsky.social. I don't really post anywhere else except for in Discord, so you can come and join us in the Discord. There's an invite link in the notes. Come and join us there and come and hang out and talk about Touhou music with us or whatever else you want to talk about.
Yeah.
We've also got a Patreon, patreon.com/CRT Sound System. You can find the podcast, all the podcast socials are Linktree/CRT Sound System as well. So all of those links there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, and most importantly, Tom, we want you to come on the podcast. You, the listener.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. How
and
dare I
that
forget?
is we are an open source podcast. You can just come on. You can tell us what song or
Yeah.
what soundtrack you want to do, and Tom will
Yeah. Like
generate the playlist.
I really do
It's
want to impress the people. Like I don't care if you are like if you don't think you have anything to say about a soundtrack, you definitely do. Like you can come on just and talk about whatever you want. Like I genuinely don't care. I want our friends to come on and just talk about some good ass music with us. Like
yeah.
um
It's about hanging. This podcast is about hanging out. God damn it!
yeah.
So come hang
Yeah.
out and bring the
Yeah.
video game over to the video game music potluck.
Yeah.
So
It's absolutely yeah.
I will point out real quick, this this last track we're going to play is one that I personally requested be added to this playlist.
Yeah.
And it sort of serves as sort of a main theme for Gensokyo. A
Yeah.
great way to send us off.
hell yeah.
Yeah, it's just I listened to it and it's like this seems like the most ending of all the tracks. So yeah, it really jumped out at me. So yeah, that track is called, let me pull back up my notes here. The Gensokyo, the Gods Loved, which is the stage 3 theme from Mountain of Faith. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us again, Justus. This has been a really, really good episode. Thank you, Reese, as always.
Of
And thank
course.
you for listening. Have a good one.